What's cracking, yo? Welcome back to Boo TV. Appreciate you for stopping in. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, stay notified, and let's get into the topic for today. As promised, I said once I hit 1,000 subscribers, I would release my top 10 players of all time. And while I thought I didn't need to think about it much, as I started putting together these rankings, I found it to be extremely difficult and found myself moving players up and down. I tried my best to be completely unbiased as much as I possibly could and really try to weigh things from as many angles as I possibly could. I started finding myself in debates with players where I would say, well, I think this guy was clearly the better basketball player, but this guy was still a great player, not as good as this guy. But when you look at what he was able to accomplish in his career, this guy had a better career with better accolades. And I didn't want this to turn into a better player versus who had the better career, because I almost felt like I would be copping out of the greatest top 10 players of all time. So I had to try to find as much of a balance between purely what you are individually and the team's success. I always thought the debate for the greatest of all time, or even ranking 10 of the greatest players of all time, is always a very nuanced process. I don't think the answer is ever black and white. I just want to say that players have to get ranked, right? So while there may be a player that's high on the list, and there may be a player that's low on the list, it does not mean that there's a whole bunch of separation between player A and player B. The majority of the players on my top 10 list each have an argument to be the greatest of all time and to occupy that number one space. It really comes down to the details when parsing these players against each other. So as you can see, I'm not doing one video where I just go through all 10 players. I'm going to release a video for each player with their ranking and a explanation as to why I ranked this player where I did. And there's going to be a playlist specifically for that, and you can find the link to that playlist in the description of each of these videos. With that being said, let's get into the player for today. Coming in at number 8 is Wilt Chamberlain, Wilt the Stilt, aka the Big Dipper. Listen, I'm going to tell you guys right now, the rest of the players here on out have a very legitimate case for being the greatest player of all time. The rest of the players, the majority of the players that I will be continuing to rank, it was very, very, very difficult for me to try to put these players in a ranking position, and I could see a valid argument for Wilt and other players that we will get to later in the week for being number one, and I wouldn't argue with you. So as easily as I put him at 8, he can easily be at 1. That's how much gap and that's how much context are given to each of these players where I can see, yeah, you have a point, man. I got him at 8, but I can't even argue with you. I struggled with putting Wilt at 1 just as much as I struggled with putting Wilt at 8. Like, that is how difficult this was. So don't think of it as a slight against Wilt Chamberlain, because I'm telling you now, I could have put him at 1 too, and I wanted to. Okay, so it was so difficult. And I had to look at so many different things: championships, style of play, dominance, context, the era, things like that. We all know about Wilt Chamberlain's complete and utter dominance in his era. Wilt has over 70 NBA records. And with that being said, a huge amount of his records are largely considered to be unbreakable, and they are. These are records that will never, ever be touched, such as averaging 22.9, almost 23 rebounds a game. Oh no, for a career, my bad, for a career, not a game, for a career. Or over 50 points per game in a season. Scoring 100 points in a single game, which that might be reached given how easy it is to score in this league today, and the free throw line and the 3-point shooting. But I don't think we'd ever see it in regulation. I think it would take several overtimes for a player to hit his 100-point mark. Or 55 rebounds in a single game. I don't think that's ever going to be touched. Scoring 65 or more points 15 times. Even that one, given today's league, if it continues to trend this direction or even stays its course, that might be even possible. Or 50 or more points 118 times in an NBA season. Chamberlain's impact on the game was directly responsible for NBA rule changes within the NBA during his era, including ones like widening the lane, because they were trying to keep the big man farther away from the basket because he was just dominating too close. And they also instituted offensive goaltending because of Wilt Chamberlain. They also started banning dunking to convert free throws. They also had a rule revision centered around inbounding the ball, making it against the rules to inbound the ball over the backboard, because they just throw it up over the backboard. Wilt's right there. I got it. Dunk. Because nobody could reach him vertically. Nobody could reach him vertically. Wilt Chamberlain played for Philadelphia, San Francisco, and the Los Angeles Lakers, and even had a tenure as a coach. Played from 1958 to 1973, as we all know, at the center position. Like I said, he's a 2-time NBA champion, NBA Finals MVP, 4-time Most Valuable Player, 13-time NBA All-Star, NBA All-Star Game MVP, 7-time All-First Team, 3-time All-Second Team, 2 times All-Defensive First Team, NBA Rookie of the Year, 7-time NBA Scoring Champion, 11-time NBA Rebounding Champion, NBA Assist Leader, most points in a single game, as we all know, 100, most rebounds, like I said earlier, 55. The dude was an absolute record crusher. Wilt Chamberlain could do anything in the world that he wanted to do on the basketball court, right? For his career, he averaged 30 points per game, 22.9 rebounds per game, 4.4 assists per game. The dude was otherworldly, no question about it. And while Wilt Chamberlain racked up so many points, so many averaging numbers, so many counting numbers, and probably could have even done more had he maintained that aggressive stat stuffing mentality, he was often criticized despite his immense skill and dominance as a player on the floor. Chamberlain was often called selfish, and people around the league and critics, fans, called Wilt Chamberlain a loser because he only won 2 NBA championships, and he lost 7 out of 8 playoff series against his rival Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics. So while he had this individual dominance, it didn't always contribute to team success. Now, a lot of things can be taken into consideration there. The roster, yada, 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 yada. But not just that, but there's a lot of context that has to go into things like that. And I do understand that. But Wilt does have some culpability in that situation for not galvanizing his teammates and demanding more of them if that was a situation. I can't quite speak on it as much as I would like to because obviously I wasn't around in that era. So I can only talk about it from what I've learned, videos I've watched, testimony from players, coaches, fans, things like that. And I try to put it all together the best way I can. And for Wilt and a lot of players that I've seen through the history of our league, sometimes in certain situations, in certain aspects, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You know, check out this quote by Frank DeFord of ESPN that said Chamberlain was caught in a no-win situation. If you win, everybody says, well, look at him. He's that big. If you lose, everybody says, how could he lose? A guy that size? I understand, and I think that is very true. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You're not going to make everybody happy. You're not going to win the love of everybody. You're not going to win the support of everybody. You just got to go out there, do the best that you can do, make your decisions, and let the chips lie where they may. One thing I do know about Wilt is that, yes, Wilt was a pompous guy. I recently watched an interview with him and Bill Russell. And he even doubled down on some of the opinions that were spewed out about Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt basically said, listen, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to play hard every goddamn day. If I win, I win. If I lose, I lose. But if I do lose, I'm going to go out, guns blazing, getting every point I can get, getting every rebound I can get, getting every block I could get. And you can't say it was on me because look what I did. And I get that to an extent, but that kind of mentality is not always going to win over the support of your teammates and get the best out of them. But I get where he's coming from. Sometimes you can play like that, but not be fishing for stats, but just playing the natural course of the game, exploiting disadvantages and taking advantage of them and still get your numbers. But purposely going out and trying to get numbers so that they can't pin a loss on you, that type of energy is felt, and you can see the difference. You can see a player that's doing it for one reason or see a player that's doing it through the natural flow of the game. And it's not going to sit right with teammates and critics. I look at Wilt's dominance in his era as an individual player, and I say, okay, looking at his stature, his athletic abilities, what he was able to do, and taking nothing from him. You see, here's the thing. I can't criticize, because people say, oh, he's taller. He was taller than mostly everybody else at the time. And there wasn't as many teams around at that time. Okay, the man can't control what era he played in. But you cannot sit here and knock him for exploiting the league that he played in to his advantage. We see that even in today's league. Steph Curry, for example, exploiting, and in some ways he might have helped create the league that we have today with his three-point shooting. But we know that's Steph's bread and butter, and he's going to capitalize on what the league allows him to capitalize on and take advantage of it and shoot the three ball, as we've seen many other players do that as well. But we don't look at Steph Curry and say, hey, well, he played in this era, so yeah, three-point shooting, it was more emphasized and da-da-da-da. Now, some people might bring that up. I might in certain situations just to provide context to things, but I'm not going to necessarily really diminish Steph Curry for doing what he did in his era, but I might take it into context for certain situations, not necessarily to bash him or to diminish his value, but just stating the obvious. And I'm not going to do that for Wilt Chamberlain or any other big that dominated in the past. I won't do that, especially if their skill set and their athletic abilities has shown me that if I plop that very version of that player in today's league, they would still be dominant to some extent. And I do believe that about Wilt Chamberlain. I absolutely do. If we take Wilt Chamberlain with all his skills and abilities and we put him in today's NBA, don't even give him the medical enhancements and the resources and everything. We're not even giving him that, because he'd be even better if he had the resources and the technology that the players have today. But just take what we know about Wilt Chamberlain and plop him in today's league, he would still be dominant. Do I think he would be as dominant as he was? Do I think he'd be getting over 22 rebounds a game? Maybe close. Maybe close. Do I think Wilt could average 50 points in today's league for a whole season? Probably not. Even if he tried, he might get close, but it'd be very difficult. Only because he's going to meet players of similar size. Not every game. There's a lot of small ball that goes on today. And like I said, he would exploit that and take advantage of it. He would. But on more than he did in his era, he's going to come across a Joel Embiid, somebody similar size that could guard him. He's going to come up and he'd have to guard as well, another 7-footer. A Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? A Nikola Jokic to a lesser degree, but he'd have to guard Jokic. And Jokic isn't a horrible defender, but he's average at best. And other bigs that they just might throw his way to disrupt him, he'd have to deal with that in this era. I still think he would be great, arguably the best player in the league. Still think he'd be great. Because I look at Giannis Antetokounmpo. Not the same player. They have some similarities, and similar stature. But you see what Giannis is doing in today's league. And I would argue that Wilt's even better than Giannis Antetokounmpo. Much better post-game, much more polished player than Giannis was or is. So you drop Wilt in today's league and he'd still be dominant. As dominant? Probably not. But still dominant. And I really don't like crossing eras and merging eras that much, but if I see a player that's transcendent and can play in any era, exactly how we've seen them in their era, yeah, I can open up about talking about putting people in this era and showing you how they would still dominate to some degree, or how they might be less effective to some degree. And any player that can transcend eras like that, a great player, speaks volumes to how great that player actually was. And I see it already. Before you guys say anything, but boo, months ago you put out a video saying Shaq would be even more dominant in today's era than he was in his era. So how can you say it wouldn't be the same for Wilt? You're being a hypocrite. You're contradicting yourself. No, I'm not. Wilt's length, not his body mass or his strength or his bulk, Wilt's length was more advantageous to him in his era. And he'd see more length in this era more frequently. Like I said, they play a lot of small ball now, so when the small ball line is about, Wilt's going to dominate like he did back in his era. But when they throw in a long, doesn't even have to be a good player, but they just throw in somebody long just to make him work a little bit harder and alter his shots. Like I said, a Giannis, an Embiid, a Claxton, whatever the case may be. Every team has at least one or two 7-footers. Whether they utilize them or not depends on the matchups, right? They usually don't bring them out unless somebody's throwing an Embiid out or somebody else where they have to throw somebody with size at them. But like I said, still dominant. But the difference with Shaq is it wasn't about Shaq's height so much as his height with his mass, his size, his body, his brutality. Shaq was a monster, a behemoth. So Shaq, it's a different effect. It's a different effect. There were going to be 4 people hanging on Shaq's shoulders, and he's still just going to back you down and dunk on them in today's league. Even when they throw the length at Shaq in today's league, he's just too goddamn strong and overpowering. Even with the length, there's nothing that these teams can. There's not a single player in today's league that they can throw at Shaq and is going to do anything with him. He's just too strong, too overpowering, too big, too much of a monster. And therein lies the difference. Wilt wasn't this hulking monster. Length and athleticism. Shaq was a hulking behemoth monster. So there's where the difference is. As I'm ranking these players, it's kind of like, well, what's the criteria for which you are basing the top 10 players of all time? And at the end of the day, who's going to be number one? Who's going to be your GOAT? Right? The argument is top 10 players of all time. Players, right? So if my criteria was screw team success, screw the team success, we're not talking about championships, just player. Player. Who's the greatest player of all time? Even more so if it was given their era, who's the greatest player of all time? Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain. Screw team success. I don't even care. Just player. Player. Point to the best player. Point to the best player. And Wilt Chamberlain. You can't argue what he did in his time. Individually. But for my criteria, I would like to incorporate team success and all that other stuff, bridge it together and find a balance. Wilt Chamberlain. Well, it's got to be Wilt Chamberlain. Look at the record books. Like the video I just watched. It basically said, hey, if the world got mostly evaporated in another 100 years and there were still some people alive, there was no video footage of these NBA players, but all we had was record books. And someone's looking through the record books. Undoubtedly, if somebody asked them, well, who's the greatest player to ever play in the NBA? They'd just be scrolling through the record books and they'll be like, based on every record I'm looking at and every individual accolade, oh, it's Wilt Chamberlain. It's Wilt Chamberlain. It's not even close. I thought that was interesting in that video I just put out recently. Making the case for Wilt Chamberlain. It was. Go check it out if you haven't seen it. And I was like, yeah, yeah. But for my criteria, I factored in team success and championships and all that other stuff that comes with it and an era and tried to come up with the best conclusion I can come up with. And we all know, and I didn't know this till maybe a week or two ago, I didn't know that Wilt Chamberlain had a losing stigma attached to him amongst his peers and amongst the critics. I'm going to read a quote to you guys. Rick Barry once wrote, I'll say what most players feel, which is that Wilt is a loser. He is terrible in big games. He is terrible in big games, excuse me. He knows he's going to lose and be blamed for the loss, so he dreads it. And you can see it in his eyes. And anyone who has ever played with him will agree with me, regardless of whether they would admit it publicly. When it comes down to the closing minutes of a tough game, an important game, he doesn't want the ball. He doesn't want any part of the pressure. It is at these times that greatness is determined, and Wilt doesn't have it. There's no way you can compare him to a pro like Bill Russell or a Jerry West. These are clutch competitors. Now, to be fair, Jerry West lost a lot in the finals, if I'm not mistaken. So, I'm just not taking Rick Barry's word as gospel, but what I've researched and what I have seen and heard is that other players around the league, other people in positions around the league, has shared Rick Barry's general sentiment and opinion. So I do take that into consideration. But then again, like I said, I wasn't around to watch this to really come to my own conclusion based on everything I see. So I have to pull from the media and the history that's available to me and people's testimony and pull from that. So I take that into consideration, but not super heavy, but I do take that into consideration, but not super heavy. this was a very, 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 very difficult for me, man. I didn't want to put Wilt at 8 just because I knew individually the dude was unmatched individually. It was unmatched. Then it was hard to like put him ahead of the other people who had more team success than he had. I just try my best to find a balance between it all. And his records are going to be mostly untouched till the end of time. No question about it. Wilt Chamberlain could do anything he wanted on the basketball court in his time, man. And even in today's era, he could do much of the same, though probably not as effective, but still dominant. Will could give it to you right hand, left hand, just from the video footage I've seen. Right hand, left hand, mid range, good touch around the basket, dunk on you, block everything, rebound everything. Super athletic, can run the floor, can guard multiple positions, can guard all 5 positions. Really, dude was an athlete. And if he was challenged to rack up assists and pass the ball and find teammates, he could do that. He can do that too, and he proved it. He proved it. He proved it because he was like, oh, people saying I don't pass the ball. People say I'm selfish. Okay, watch this. Watch how many assists I can rack up. Boom, there you go. Dude could really do anything he wanted to. He was playing on, like I like to say, he was playing on creator mode. He was playing on God mode. Just make it happen. Voila. Watch. This is what you want? Oh, this is what you want? Voila. Oh, you want to do that? Voila. Listen, he could have very well been I know I said it 100 times in this video. He could have been very well number 1 as easily as I put him on 8. And it wasn't easy. I'm just keep saying it's easily, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. These rankings are tough, man. And I know we got a lot of people on the channel here that got Wilt at 1, and I won't argue with you. You have a valid argument. I won't argue with you. My boy A-Ram. I know my boy A-Ram got Wilt at number 1. Respect, man. And you got an argument for it. In closing, I would like to read a comment to you all by subscriber/viewer Greg Met on his argument for why Wilt Chamberlain is number 1. Appreciate the comment, Greg Met. Greg says, nobody except Wilt Chamberlain ever averaged 30-20 for a season. Wilt did it also for a career. Wilt has more 30-20 games than the whole rest of the league in any era combined. Jordan scored 50-plus points 31 times in his career. Kobe did it 25 times. Wilt did it 118 times, 54 times in a single season. Wilt has recorded 128 of 147 ever recorded 30-30 games. That means the whole rest of the league of any era combined recorded 19. Wilt has more 50-25 games than the whole rest of the league in any era combined. Wilt has more 65-point games than the whole rest of the league in any era combined. Wilt averaged 40 points per game, also 25 rebounds per game for a span of 515 games, for a span of 515 games. Second on the list is Elgin Baylor with a span of 33 games. NBA officially started recording blocks and steals in 1973 right after Wilt retired. But there do exist block stats for 112 games Wilt played. In these 112 games, Wilt averaged 8.8 blocks. He played all those 112 games when he was 35 years old or older. Assuming his block stats were better when he was in his prime with good knees, a career average triple-double 30-20-10 is possible. Wilt grabbed 55 rebounds in a single game without overtime versus Bill Russell, second on the list in rebounds per game for career. Right after Wilt, both played whole 48 minutes. And the Celtics, while scoring 39 points, Wilt also scored 62 points on Bill Russell once. Wilt has a quintuple-double, 53 points, 32 rebounds, 14 assists, 24 blocks, and 11 steals versus the Lakers in 1968. He scored 100 points in a single game and averaged 50.4 points per game and 25.6 rebounds for a season. No doubt, Wilt is the GOAT. And that's an argument. Like I said, for me, He could have been 1. He could have been 8. But I had to take everything else into consideration and context. This was hard for me. Appreciate you guys. Let me know what you think about it. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I would love to hear your opinion. And tell me where you think I'm wrong. Tell me where you think I'm right. And where do you have Wilt Chamberlain on your top 10 list? Appreciate you guys so much. Take care. Be blessed. Be on the lookout. Number 7 coming right at you.